Our objective is to put out a good product so that you can be proud, and we represent Des Moines, and we represent who you are as people and what Iowa is.
This is the Hometown Hoops Podcast with Drake Men's Basketball and your host, Michael Admire.
Hey, welcome in. It is the Hometown Hoops Podcast here on the Drake Sports Media Podcast Network, and we are powered by Learfield. Of course, we stream these episodes with video on the Facebook and YouTube pages of Drake Athletics, or you can listen to us through a more traditional form of podcasting through the free Varsity Network app from Learfield or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, like to mention, our postseason coverage is brought to you entirely by Hy-Vee. So appreciate the sponsorship and support of Hy-Vee Grocers. All right, I hope you all enjoyed the best week in college basketball, watching March basketball, all while your team holds that AQ in their back pocket and waiting for the guarantee come Selection Sunday. I think we've got a fun episode coming up here. On this episode of HTH, we welcome in the president of Drake University, Marty Martin. He stops by and we cover a ton of ground. He grew up in Kentucky, a huge Kentucky basketball fan, also a son and grandson of lawyers. We discuss how Drake is positioned in this landscape of college basketball. And he also has a great story of the day he decided, him and Brian Harden decided to hire head coach Ben McCollum. That's all coming up. But first, these D2 dogs are dancing, and the chip created from jabs like that is back. This season started with mild expectations. Daniel Abreu even said recently he thought his role was to come in and help establish the culture for future success. By Thanksgiving, we knew it would be different. The Bulldogs kept winning more than any other team in the country and kind of coasted to a regular season Missouri Valley Conference title. Yet prognosticators and bracketologists needed more. The same chip that these dogs carried into the season was back, and they answered all doubts again in St. Louis by leaving no doubt. A dominating double-digit win, the biggest comeback of the season, and having the last word with their arch rival. This Selection Sunday, the Bulldogs will find out what their seed is, where they're going, and who they're playing. There'll also be a trendy pick to play Cinderella this March. But these Bulldogs don't need to pack slippers. No. They just need to take what got them here. Competitive, tough defense, complementary offense, and a D2 size chip on their shoulder. All right, I'm fired up for Selection Sunday. We will have a Selection Sunday party at the Knapp Center. We're throwing a party, so make sure you show on up. 4 o'clock, the doors will open to the Knapp Center. The CBS broadcast will begin at 5 p.m. And once again, we will have a CBS camera in attendance showing off this team and the Bulldog fans, Drake Nation, that will be in the background. Get a chance to see yourself maybe on national television. It's also a very family-friendly event. We've got inflatables for kids to play with. We'll have a couple photo booth sections set up, and we'll also have an autograph session at the end, a free poster giveaway. You can get it autographed by the team. That's what it's all about, being Des Moines' hometown team. All right, a fun conversation coming up with Drake University President Marty Martin. Without further ado, here you go. Marty Martin, thank you so much for joining us here. The last time we were talking, let's just kind of go with what we were just talking about off camera. Right. I got new net to display here. Last time and confetti. How about that? How about that? Fun. Last time I saw you, we were cutting down the nets in St. Louis at the Enterprise Center. How special is that stuff for you?
I recognize that it's a culmination of so much hard work on behalf of our coaches and student athletes, and they've reached this mountaintop. And I love it because I know how good it feels to them and how good it feels to all the rest of us. I mean, you were there. You know, the excitement, the people are just losing their minds. The team played so well throughout the entire weekend, but particularly that last game. I mean, it was just, that second half was almost a historic performance. And so the excitement built to the end. And then when we won the game, you know, everybody just kind of explodes in joy. And where else are you going to find that? You know, it's hard to recreate that in another environment than a place like Drake that does sports the way we do it.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a lot of the conversation here today is how Drake University and Drake Athletics have kind of combined together to create this beautiful symmetry on campus. But I do want to lay a little bit of foundation first, and just your upbringing in sports. You were born and raised in Kentucky, correct? You went to Kentucky.
Yep.
That is a basketball-crazed state.
Right, it is.
How did growing up in Kentucky shape you as a sports fan?
Sure. Well, I was actually born in Lexington, Kentucky. My dad was in his last year as law student at University of Kentucky. He was an undergrad in law school there. My great-grandfather was in the second graduating class, University of Kentucky College of Law. My sisters attended there. I attended there. Cousins, now nephews, nieces. I mean, it's our family school, the University of Kentucky. And, of course, it's basketball superpower, has been forever, was all throughout my childhood. So it was, you know, it was a core feature of our lives, was Kentucky basketball, watching it on television. You know, the highlight of the year was getting up to one or two games. We'd always go up for the New Year's Eve game in Freedom Hall in Lexington, and normally that would be against Notre Dame. So Digger Phelps was the coach, and it was so exciting to go up for that game. Then, you know, once Rupp Arena opened, like to go into Rupp Arena, you know, this mecca of basketball. Mm-hmm. It was just a big deal, as it was when I was an undergrad and law student there, and as it remained in my life for many, many years thereafter, and actually still does to a point. But, you know, I've been at Gonzaga for 10 years, and now I'm all about the Drake Bulldogs. But yeah, it was huge. I could name the starting five from 1975, you know, for Kentucky, and it just was something you lived and breathed every moment.
Have you, this is kind of an aside, have you looked at the bracket projections? I mean, Lexington is a host site.
I saw that.
And the Kentucky Wildcats may be a 3 seed in the same area as your Drake Bulldogs. How are you going to handle that?
Actually, somebody showed me, John Smith showed me yesterday something on the phone that said Drake is projected to play Gonzaga in Lexington.
Oh, my gosh. That would be something.
Wouldn't that be something?
Oh, my goodness.
Absolutely.
Okay, so did you play sports growing?
I did,
yeah, what were kind of your sports?
I played, you know, this was a rural community, so, you know, baseball, football, basketball was the focus. I also swam and played tennis. Now, tennis was not that well-funded an activity there, but I still like to play. Played basketball into high school, didn't finish high school playing basketball. Honestly, I didn't grow as much as I had hoped and didn't have enough weight. So swimming was always my best sport, but still always played a lot of rec stuff in college and law school, and even in the Air Force when I was in the Air Force. So I've always remained active. Now it's biking and golf. You know, I can't sit still, so I find that release mostly in doing some sport. Always have.
Yeah, so you don't go professional in sports.
Right.
You take the I guess follow in your father's footsteps a little bit into law school. Yeah. What led you down that path? Was it what your dad had laid the foundation for?
No, it actually wasn't at all. I was quite determined not to be a lawyer because you grew up in a small town. You know, everybody's like, "Oh, you're going to be a lawyer with your dad." Because my great-grandfather, grandfather, father, myself, all lawyers. My grandfather did not go to University of Kentucky. He went to Jefferson School of Law, which became U of L's law school. But he was Kentucky senator. He was county attorney. He was circuit court judge. So everybody knew us as lawyers, and it was always presumed I would be one, and not by my parents at all, but everybody else. And so I kind of determined I was not going to be that. You know, that's how you are as a kid, right? Got into undergrad and started, you know, my studies and kind of moved through a number of degree programs till I settled on what I was excited about. And I just decided late in my sophomore, early junior year that I would go to law school. It wasn't fixed on being a lawyer. I just recognized it as a very versatile degree program. I knew that if I wanted to, I could always go home and practice, and that's pretty comforting to know you kind of have that in the pocket, but I wasn't committed to it. And by the time I finished law school, I discovered the Air Force JAG program. And for a number of different reasons, that looked quite exciting to me. travel overseas, try a lot of cases, serve the country, and I got to do all of that in just, in a significant amount. So great choice, great profession, and this profession, that experience, that education really informs my work as president and the way that I proceed. So I greatly value that I made the choice to go to law school, but I greatly value how it's served me in things other than practicing law.
I have a question as a follow-up, but first, just as a clarification, your sons are now both lawyers, right?
Actually, our youngest is.
Youngest is a lawyer, okay.
The oldest son is in Minneapolis doing communications and marketing work, and the youngest just graduated from the University of Oregon College of Law in May, and he is a deputy district attorney in Lincoln County, Oregon, which for those of you who know Oregon, that's on the coast. He works in a town called Newport. So this kid is living his best life. He drives 10 miles each way to work right down the coast highway, and mountains on one side, ocean on the other.
So he followed somewhat
yeah.
within your path, but
right.
he was smart and stayed out on the West Coast and enjoyed the weather.
I was at Gonzaga for 10 years, and those were his 10 most formative years, so he thinks of himself as a Northwesterner.
Yeah. All right. As you look down your resume, you're just talking about how much being a lawyer kind of helped inform who you are today. You look at your resume and your life experiences, Lieutenant Colonel of the Air Force. That's where some of the leadership and critical thinking come into play. Law school, your litigation, and public speaking. So all those things kind of come together as a confluence to create President Marty Martin. But when did you first think, I might want to be a president of a university?
I actually know the moment. I was interviewing for the dean's job at Gonzaga, and this was many years ago, because I started as dean there in 2005. So this is December of 2004. And I was doing a video conference interview, and the technology is still pretty rudimentary. So it was this lag in voice. Even then, you'd speak, and it would take a second for them to hear you. And so we had to get to that cadence. And the picture that I had of the other group was pretty fuzzy as you got past like the first two people at the table. So it was this couple of people back in the back that I could just make out as kind of these distinct blobs. And at one point, late in the interview, somebody asked me a question. You want to be dean at Gonzaga, but what comes after that? And the first time ever, I thought and said, well, I think maybe someday I want to be a university president. And one of the persons that I could not make out in the back said, oh my God, why would you ever want to do that? I later found out that he was a longtime vice president at Gonzaga who had served as interim president of Gonzaga for about 8 months. and his experience was, oh my God, why would you ever want to do that?
I was going to say, I was wondering if the person asking the question was the president of Gonzaga or something along those lines. That's fantastic. You end up getting into you were in higher education, and then you take it to this level here as president of Drake University. I think it's so interesting, the cohesion between Gonzaga and what Drake could be. I know that was some of the topics of conversation with yourself and Brian Hardin early on in his tenure was, can we make Drake the Gonzaga of the Midwest? And just out of kind of curiosity, what was it about Gonzaga? You were there from the early years of Mark Few and even before him with Dan Munson. What was it about Gonzaga then in the early stages that created the giant we see today?
Yeah, so I got there in 2005, I think. I think Munson and Few
they were late
changed hands
90s.
in like 98, 99, right. But it's still early days. I mean, the arena had just opened. We were there for the first year of the arena, I think. The program was having success, but not yet the kind of respect on the national stage, because it would go 29-2 and get an 11 seed. Does that sound familiar?
Yes. I was looking at that. Their first 3 years in the NCAA tournament, they were 10 seed, and then 12 seed.
Right.
So even after having some respect for the previous 2 years, they were still a 12 seed.
And that continued for a number of years, even during my tenure, until really just as I was leaving, when it was okay. Now we'll really reflect the success, and it'll be a 3-4-2-1, whatever it really should be. But it just took a long time to get there. But So just, a lot of people have asked me, what does basketball mean to Gonzaga? And I give them some data points. When the run started in the late 90s, I think the incoming freshman class was less than 500, 450 to 500. It's now, I think, probably over 1,500, so tripling. The finances of the institution were really teetering at that point, and it's strong today. The major gifts that it has received in its history as Gonzaga come from two persons, neither of which went to college, so much less went to Gonzaga, both of which got connected to the institution through basketball because of its prominence, but then have given the vast majority of their gifts to academic and arts programs. And that's the whole idea of the front porch, right? Athletics, if you do it right, represents the institution to many different people. They get excited about that. You can then tell them the rest of the story of the place, and they get excited about the rest of the story because they understand that these things are not separate. They're one and the same. When we talk about student athlete, we mean student athlete. Same thing at Gonzaga. They talk about student athlete, they mean student athlete. And people respect that. Even in this environment that is honestly turning largely away from that model, even more so, I think now, people respect that we are committed to the student-athlete model, and that's what generates not just excitement, but I really do think pride. So being at Gonzaga, very student-centered, private institution, seeing Drake is very similarly situated in terms of all of its orientation, obviously not having the kind of success that Gonzaga had back then, but we're on that track now. But the critical feature of that is you proceed from your values as grounded in the student-athlete model and stay true to that. Even as hard as it's getting, every year harder and harder in terms of the pressure we feel from the competition that has pivoted much more to what you might just call it, let's just call it a pro model, right? But we wouldn't be Drake if we don't stay true to that. And the same thing for Gonzaga.
So with where we are right now then in athletics, how do you strike that balance of keeping the integrity of the student-athlete model,
right,
but also understanding that the power shift to 4 major conferences,
right,
transfer portal, NIL, and eventually what we'll have next year, the pay-to-play model.
Right.
So how do you strike that while you're also trying to educate, the majority of your campus are not student-athletes?
Right. Yeah, it's tough, and it's getting harder almost every day. I just in finding the path to remain competitive when money becomes more and more the objective of this. If the competition is all about the money, we're not going to win that competition. We're just not big enough to win that competition. We don't have the resource base. We don't have the big football, et cetera, to win that competition. But nevertheless, with the good work of our collective and our supporters, we can generate resources that appropriately acknowledge the contribution these student athletes are making in terms of the financial condition and the profile of the institution, and we want to appropriately acknowledge that. But our strength has to be our culture. We have to make it really hard for a student athlete to walk away from here, no matter what's on the table elsewhere. That doesn't mean we win all those. We won't win them all. But we'll win a good number of them because I have confidence in Brian and you guys in the staff and administration on athletics and our coaches that that's the culture you're building and sustaining and growing. And that is hard to walk away from. I mean, your friends are here, you're supported here. You know that when you're here, you're going to be taken care of and you're going to find the kind of success that you always imagined as a student and as an athlete, and that's going to set you up for a lifetime. That's the key. The Drake formation and the formation in this environment does include athletics, and what a formative experience it is to be a Division I student athlete. That's the most powerful thing about what we do. But that formation sets these student athletes, as it does set up the rest of our students, for a lifetime of success. And that's not necessarily the case when you're jumping. It's a very different dynamic. And you're only as good as the last moment of your experience at that last institution. You haven't built any legacy. You haven't built relationships. You haven't built the kind of network that you would build here that literally will sustain you for a lifetime. That's what's being lost in this. That's what frustrates me the most. I mean, you can think back to some of the players who have left here in the recent years who, had they stayed, just imagine the legacy they would have established, what it would have meant to walk back into the Knapp Center 20 years from now, or to walk down the streets of Des Moines 30 years from now. That never would have gotten old, right? But that's gone when you make that choice. Again, your whatever legacy, if you even can think of it in those terms now, you have is only what you did at the last moment at the last place, as opposed to your career-long experience of a single place. That's a big deal in terms of what's being lost in this environment.
When I hear you talk about, the culture that's being created here and that has been established through what Brian Hardin has done as the director of athletics, and through the coaches that are hired. This is the men's basketball podcast, so we lean heavy into that aspect of it. So Coach McCollum is so ingrained into culture, into the process, into creating an experience for people in his program that make them better men when they leave here. So when you're going through the hiring process and Coach McCollum is sitting across the table from you, or Zoom, or ever how you did it, which you can tell us how that happened.
Sure.
What are the things you're looking for that then led to his hire, and then how rewarding has it how's it been to see some of that stuff come to fruition?
Sure. Well, this time around, Ben was well known to us.
Yep.
As I think people understand, he was interviewed when Darren was hired. And he made a tremendous impression on Brian and myself. That round, he came to the house, the president's house, and we sat down and talked for a couple of hours. And, when he went away, I thought, that guy's special. Obviously, we hired Darren at that point in time, and I think that was the right decision given the experience level Darren had. Obviously, it proved out to be the right decision with the success that Darren brought for us. But we never forgot Ben, and he and Brian stayed in touch. I actually have a golfing buddy whose son played basketball for Ben down at Northwestern, and he was playing during those years, so I was getting constant reports on the team and the performance, and this buddy loves Ben, understandably so. So I kept learning more and more about him, and I'm watching from afar what they're doing, and, winners win, kind of start there. That's something Ben's got in his pocket. He's a winner, and he wins. There's just something about people who know how to do that. There's a determination, an understanding, a kind of an intuitiveness, an emotional intelligence, and Ben has all of that. So in this case, when Darren made the decision he made to go to West Virginia, Ben was right at the top of our list, and obviously we wanted to test that proposition as we did. Obviously we arrived at Ben, but in that process, my involvement in that process included another interview with him at the president's house. And I had no questions about his character. I had no questions whatsoever about his leadership, about his basketball acumen. I really didn't have many questions at all, but the one thing that I focused in on was, the pressure that comes from being a coach, and how does he deal with that pressure? How does he internalize it? Does he externalize it? And if so, what does that look like? But I remember the one kind of question I put to him in that regards was, let's just imagine a scenario. There's 2 minutes left in a game. You've been up the entire game. You've lost the lead. Maybe you're tied. Maybe you're down a couple of points. It's a huge game. How do you respond as a coach? How do you recenter your young men, get them back into the mindset of winning this game? Because obviously we see this, right? You start to lose a lead late and you can kind of crater. And you can just lose your confidence that you can win. And once that confidence is broken, you're done. So how do you maintain or get that confidence back? His answer was, I live for those moments. That's why I do this, because that's an experience of living that you just can't have doing anything else. And that's why I do this. And win or lose, we're going to fight to the end. I'm going to instill confidence in them. It doesn't mean you're going to win because it's sport. There's no guarantees. But that's why I do this. I loved that answer. When he gave that answer, I was 99% of the way there. Now I'm 100%. And we've seen it, haven't we?
Absolutely.
I mean, we saw it Sunday afternoon. We saw it actually Saturday afternoon, because Saturday was a tougher game. We weren't playing, we weren't playing great, but I really believe that every single game we go into now, we have the coaching advantage every time, and particularly into that second half, because of what he said and what I've seen manifest as he's gone through this year. He just doesn't break.
And they're 5-0. Excuse me, 5-0 in overtime games this year, including I think
Now, can I say something?
3-0 on road games.
I could do with a fewer of
Fewer
those, you know.
You deal with enough stress in your regular job.
I like the 13-plus point lead with 2 minutes to go, and I can calculate the time left in possession, and we've won. That's where I like to be.
Yeah, you've got enough stress in your regular job to then also have stress in your fandom life.
Right.
It is like, why do we do this to ourselves sometimes in sports? Well,
because it's so joyful.
It is
at the end.
because when you get to cut down the nets, that makes it all worth it.
Right.
Okay, so one of the things that I remember from the introduction press conference of Coach Mack, you touched on some of those points, but I think the line that I love the most, and I use it weekly, is how you talk about we're in the golden era of Drake athletics.
Yeah.
There's not just one sport that plays a role in that.
Right.
What is it like as a president when you see your student athletes having the success all across the board, and how special? Yeah, can you fully enjoy how special this moment is?
Oh gosh, yes. You know, I come back to the students, right? The student athletes, they're winning in the classroom. They're setting average GPA records almost every single semester. We generated so many academic All-Americans in the last 10 years. So they're winning in the classroom. They're in the community. They've got. I talk about this with them. They've got profile. You know, they're bulldogs. They're Division I athletes. There's a lot of people that look up to them, particularly young people. And that's a profile that comes with responsibility to represent. And they do that. You know, they're doing thousands of hours of community service a year. And I really admire them for that. And then they're winning on the field of competition obviously across many sports, because we won the All-Sports Trophy last year. First time in our history, I think only the third time a private school has won it in the Missouri Valley Conference. Had not been done since 1961 by a private school. And the other remarkable thing about that year is I was born in 1961.
There we go. That's how you remembered it.
And that All-Sports Trophy, honestly, is one of the highlights of my entire almost 10 years here now, because it just represents the holistic, cumulative effort of excellence, you know, the achievement of excellence. And we were really close on the academic trophy as well. And, you know, we can put those two together. Man, that's nirvana.
Yeah. A couple final questions for you here. I know you're part of the Missouri Valley Conference President's Council. I don't know what the official title is.
That's it.
It is? Okay,
Council, yes.
great.
I'm the chair of it.
So you're the chair of the Missouri Valley Conference President's Council. And so among many things that you all are talking and discussing about is conference expansion and the place that the Missouri Valley Conference holds within the greater scheme of all of NCAA sports. So as a president, knowing you have a responsibility to your students first, what are some things that maybe fans don't think about when it comes to the topic of conference expansion for a mid-major, or any other topics that maybe go into discussion there within that group?
Yeah, so as you would imagine, there's a lot of schools that would love to join the Missouri Valley Conference. And we're in constant conversation as a President's Council about the possibility of expansion. Obviously, we have not pulled the trigger here recently, Belmont and Murray being the last two schools in, and we were really thrilled to invite both of them, and that both of them accepted the invitation. There's a list of others that would like to come. We just don't, at this moment in time, see the advantage in that. There's some things that kind of have to sort themselves out, the House settlement, you know, what's going to happen in terms of this reorientation of Division I, that's, you know, that governance structure that's under review right now. There's a lot of unknowns that really have to become at least better known, somewhat known, before we can pivot back to expansion, because it's hard to know if it's in your best interest or not at this point in time.
Yeah, it's a little bit of wait and see for a lot of things. I know Brian Harden talks about that a lot too. It's just we got to kind of let some of this play out, especially being a mid-major. Let's let maybe some of the Power Four duke this out, and there are Title IX implications that play into it as well. So you have to kind of sit back and watch a little bit. And one thing that I've sometimes maybe drives me a little crazy, but that's just the fan aspect of me, not the professional side of me, is Brian is extremely patient and he will take his time to make the right decision. All right, so next thing is, you talked about some of the statistics within Gonzaga about how, the student numbers, 500 students of a freshman class when you first got there is 1,500 now. How are we seeing that come into shape here at Drake? And then how is Drake capitalizing on some of this momentum? And then on top of that, you throw in, that was the late 90s, early 2000s. We're now in the post-pandemic world of higher education, where it's as hard as it's ever been to attract students to your campus. So I know I threw 3 questions at you there,
Sure,
but
that's fine.
Answer it how you feel fit.
So, and I encouraged this when I got here, the idea of being the Gonzaga of the Midwest. The times are so different. From when Gonzaga made its move and was able to kind of grab hold of that and hold on to it, and what are they going to be, 25, 26 years in a row in the tournament this year? That environment doesn't exist anymore. It's so different, frankly, so much more challenging, particularly on 2 fronts. The lesser number of students who are available to come to your school in the first place, and the intense competition that creates between institutions, and the whole difference in Division I athletics. Gonzaga couldn't do what it did then today. The resources just don't work out, and so we can't just think we can replicate that path. We have to find our own path. And again, we stay grounded in values. We stay grounded in student-athlete model. And in many instances, as you mentioned a moment ago from Brian, we're just going to have to react, because frankly, we don't control any of this. We don't control what's going to happen on NIL. We certainly don't control the House settlement. I spent a lot of time last summer trying to rally support to fight that thing, and I just couldn't get it done, because that is very unjust on schools like Gonzaga. And it was largely achieved under the threat of taking men's basketball by the Power Four. So it's just terrible. It's a terrible outcome. It's not fair. It's not just. It's not in the best service of current student athletes at all. But nevertheless, it's the world we have to navigate. So we just have to, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but stay focused on culture, stay focused on values, and know that if we do that, we can navigate what's to come, although where we end up might be quite different from where we are today. But we're still going to be a place where students can come and compete at the highest level of competition and find success in the classroom, the community, and on the field of competition. And our fans will find joy in that, but they'll also be proud of it. They'll be proud to wear that jersey and to say, I'm a Bulldog, I'm a supporter of the Bulldogs.
I think that's a perfect way to end this. I really appreciate your time and enjoy the madness that's about to ensue, and maybe we'll catch up in Lexington.
Wouldn't that be cool? All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Cheers.